Hello, everyone. Welcome. Please let us know where you're tuning in from as you're coming in this evening. I almost said this morning. I'm a little off off my time there. Um, but yeah, let us know where you're tuning in from. Um, and we'll get started in a minute or so as soon as we get all the folks into the room. Looks like we're about halfway there. And we will have the links for Lary's book on the link for Lary's book. I'll put it in the chat. And also, Lary would love to hear from you as soon, as soon as you have a question, just please put it into the chat or the Q&A, I should say. Please put the questions into the Q&A, and we'll get to your questions as they happen. We won't wait until the last minute to answer your questions. So I'll just go ahead and get started. Good evening, I'm Omar Acevedo. I'm the Literary Program Coordinator at the Mark Twain House Museum here in Hartford, Connecticut. And I'm delighted to host tonight's program, I'll Take New Haven, Tales of Rediscovery and Rejuvenation. Our virtual programs are produced in part with support honoring the late Frank Lord. We are happy to honor his memory with these programs. We are also incredibly grateful to the Wish You Well Foundation and Connecticut Public WNPR for supporting all of our virtual programs. Now, let me tell you more about tonight's program. We are welcoming back Lary Bloom and Steve Courtney for a discussion about Lary's book, I'll Take New Haven. In this book of essays, Lary explores life, a city, and life of a city. Our author, Lary Bloom, is a journalist and former editor of the Hartford Courant Sunday magazine. His essays have graced a number of publications, the New York Times, Connecticut Magazine, and most recently, the New Haven Independent. He also wrote an acclaimed 2019 biography of the artist Sol Witt. Our moderator, Steve Courtney, is the author of several books, including The Loveliest Home That Ever Was, The Story of the Mark Twain House in Hartford. He has been a journalist for 40 years, much of that time at the Hartford Courant, and has served as publicist, curatorial special project coordinator, and curatorial jack of all trades at our museum. Now, we encourage you to have a conversation in the chat. If you have any specific question, you can post that directly into our Q&A section. Ask it as soon as you have it. Don't wait until the last minute, because we are going to get to your questions as we go along. Please also note that you can click on live transcript to see live auto captioning of this event. And finally, just a reminder that I will be putting a link in the chat to purchase I'll Take New Haven through our museum store. Please buy it through us. It's supporting the museum, and we would greatly appreciate that. So that's it from me. Please sit back and enjoy. Ask your questions, and I'll turn this over to Lary and Steve.
All right, Steve. Here we are again, 20 years later. You need to unmute.
Hello again. Hello, Larry, and thank you, Omar, for your nice introduction. I am going to begin with a quotation from another writer who worked with us. Larry and I both worked at the Hartford Courant at the same time. You'll hear a little bit about that. But one of the people we worked with was Colin McEnroe, who is, as you may know, is not only a very funny and thoughtful author, but also a radio personality these days. And he launched, in his comment on Lary's book, I'll Take New Haven, a collection of essays, he launched into sort of science fiction. He says, in a world where the sun burns cold and cyborg overlords rule the land, humanity prays for a hero. That hero is Lary Bloom, bringing warmth, whimsy, and wisdom to life in New Haven and reminding his reader that every day contains a good story if you see it and tell it right. I wish some of the cyborgs would read this book, especially YW1183, who just doesn't get us. Oh, it's a long way, it may seem like a long way from the Colin's science fiction fantasy to the very real 1990s halls of the Hartford Courant, where covers of the Sunday magazine Northeast decorated the halls. But it's a shorter trip than it might seem. I worked for Lary at the magazine that he ran for 2 decades and learned a lot. Just a couple of weeks ago on an editing job, I found myself exclaiming as though to the absent author, "There it's Northeast." That's not what I exclaimed, though. I exclaimed to the absent author in my mind, not in person, "It's okay to be interesting." A Lary Bloom precept that I had absorbed back then. Lary didn't see the magazine as a place bounded by halls and walls, though. His project encouraging public art in Hartford, his role in starting and maintaining the Sunken Garden Poetry Festival, his similar role in the citywide Mark Twain days of the late 1990s, and the accompanying magazine series, Twain's World, which got me started in the lucrative Twain industry. All these brought a newspaper that sometimes seemed to be a suburban embassy in the city out onto the streets, into the theaters, into the assembly halls. He always surprises. He launched one of his projects by waking up a room of bored news executives with a bagpipe player. I'll shut up, except to say that Lary, after a monumental and sometimes painfully honest biography of the artist Sol LeWitt that came out a couple of years ago, and I will show you the book here, wonderful book, Wesleyan University Press, just get it. He has collected here, and this is the book we're talking about tonight, some of the, many of the essays that appeared in Paul Bass's New Haven Independent, which is an online journal that is itself a Connecticut monument. And as Omar said, if you have a question, give it to us and we will try to get to it in the course of the discussion. It's not in person where we can really go back and forth in that wonderful way, but here we are. Lary, again, welcome. And I wondered if you wanted to start with a very brief reading of your very brief introduction from this glorious portrait of a city.
Sure, Steve. Thank you so much for that, and for all of you out there whose faces I can't see, but I know you're there. So this is the first thing in the book. This is the first thing that appears in a collection of essays, which are sort of tied together. And it begins, it's called a brief word about longevity, because this book is written from the point of view of someone who has reached a certain age. Because as you know, there are 3 stages of life. There is youth, there is middle age, and there is, you look good. And so it begins with a quote from a person who was, in my early years, a mentor, the novelist Isaac Bashevis Singer. He said, "I believe in free will, I have no choice." When my wife Suzanne and I decided in 2015 to move from the tranquil countryside to urban chaos and culture, friends were surprised, and so were we. We had vowed never to leave our barn house in the woods of Chester, home for 3 decades. That town has barely 4,000 residents, with a village center of old world charm, small shop commerce, an air of affability. In a way, it is a mystical place too, even willing to laugh at itself. Its official town slogan, Chester, Connecticut, we know where it is. So news of our flight from this tiny brigadoon astonished more than a few locals. New Haven? Really? We love it for the theater and the music and the art and the pizza. But what about the high city taxes and the gunshots in the night? And most weren't even aware of another Elm City distinction, the selection in 2016 by Condé Nast Traveler as one of the 10 unfriendliest cities in America. Hence, we presumed, should we slip on sidewalk ice, a distinct possibility considering our senior status, a majority of witnesses would simply step over us. Nevertheless, in our resolve to add ourselves to the city's growing census count, we were far from alone. Many people who've reached retirement age inhabit these old streets, drawn by satisfactions untallied by magazine list makers whose search favors police blotters, city budgets, and stereotyping over the more difficult task of assessing quality of life. On these pages, I have taken the trouble, because I have no choice, of documenting the results of excerpt to city adventure. Every time I have a religious experience having nothing to do with theism, but a kind of movement of the soul, there is a tale to write. The yarns that follow trace how I became content in this place of urban complexities, rewards, heartbreak, and delight. Some of it is born out of the perils of aging, but these findings are relevant for younger people, just about everyone I meet these days, because they contain useful lessons drawn from decades of personal experience, observation, failure, and sources of exaltation. In short, what matters in the true end when life itself turns fragile. In these days of ours, we may have no choice about free will, but we have options aplenty about almost everything else. And that's the introduction really to the book before I get into the specifics of why we came to New Haven, why we love it here, and why the urban life is promising for people in my stage of life. You know, interesting, a place, a chance to grow, and a chance to learn, and that's what keeps you breathing. That's what keeps you alive. So, I'm open to your questions, Steve.
Yeah, well, you start out, of course, on the sidewalks of New Haven, where you apparently spend a lot of time with your co-author.
Yes.
Is your co-author still in the room?
No, Lucca, the 2-year-old, by the way, he's the only 2-year-old four-legged co-author of any book that I know. And there would be no book without Lucca. I get a book according to the history of this. I get a book. I get a dog once every 78 years, apparently, and Lucca is really the driving force in the book, because I explained to him throughout the book what New Haven is, where he lives, why he lives here, and what's special about it, what's difficult about it, and its joys and delights, including the great amount of diversity here. So anyway, Lucca, what was the question?
I asked if he was still in the room, but
I think he's playing hard to get. He's a prima donna, you know. He might come in at any point. He's an Italian water dog, and he has a mind of his own. He's, that's it.
How long have you had Lucca?
He's 2 years old, so we got him, at age 8 weeks, and we taught him how to cook dinner for us, and he's actually cooking dinner now. Very smart dog. Yeah. But he's the reason. I mean, he is the vehicle through which the book runs. Is that you? No, he's not in yet. This was a big surprise because when we lived in Hartford, by the way, the Twain House, without the Twain House, I don't know that we'd be here, because anybody who has been to Hartford, has lived there, or has been to the house, can't help but be inspired by what you find there. And to think that Mark Twain can be an inspiration for you as a writer, isn't that something? And the idea that you pick up his book and you read this and you say, well, maybe I could do that. I can't ever do it as well as he did it, but I think it affects everyone who works in Connecticut. So when I lived in West Hartford, New Haven was an important place because I came here for concerts and for theater. There wasn't theater in Hartford, of course there was, but the Schubert Theater down here was once the last tryout place for Broadway shows, and it had such great stories about people who in theater who thought they knew what they were doing. And I found over the years a million of those stories that kind of were a lure to this place. And of course, other things here, the Peabody Museum and Yale and so forth. And eventually I found employment here at this university that you attended at one point. That's called Yale, or the David Geffen University at Yale, whatever it's called now. So it all came because of this, what I thought was being comfortable in Chester, but wanting a new adventure. And I think that as we grow older and life closes in on us and we're physically less able to do things, we're more able to open our minds to get into areas we haven't ever thought of before. For example, I spent time at the Beinecke Library at Yale, which has, as you know, Steve, all these rare book collections, and saw the original manuscript of Sinclair Lewis's Dodsworth. I'm holding it in my hands. I'm looking at the crossouts that he has and the words that he's, it reminded me of being at Hyde Park in New York and seeing Franklin Roosevelt's original speech, the original version of the speech after Pearl Harbor, and he crossed out some words such as December 7th, 1941 will go down in history. That was the original version, and as we know, he changed that to a much more to a different way that stuck with us by adding certain words. And I think that to have that kind of access just opens your mind. And
you describe getting onto the Yale shuttle bus and immediately having this wealth of experiences at your feet.
Yeah, the shuttle bus. That's the thing. We got quite interested. My wife Suzanne and I got quite interested in the idea of trying to find a place where we could walk to the places we needed to go, such as the markets. Even, I'm, a block and a half away from dental implants, should I need that service, which I often do. And to the gym, to the park, which is a half a block away, to so many places, so that two cars were no longer necessary. Even one car seems excessive at this point, because the public transportation is so good. There is the Yale shuttle bus, which is open to all, and as long as you have some Yale connection, which includes, I've heard of Yale. That's a Yale connection, right? And the public bus, which of course is free now, and maybe, I hope, free for a while, stops right in front of the house. The Yale shuttle bus is free and stops right in front of the house. And it can lead you anywhere. It takes you downtown, takes you any place, including Yale New Haven, which a hospital, which becomes an important part of anyone this age. And similarly, essays in the book are reflective of that, such as the essay "Life at 32 Degrees Fahrenheit," which is what Dr. Mel Goldstein liked about being a weatherman at Channel 8, those of you who remember him. He loved being a Connecticut broadcaster, weatherman, because of the way in the winter the temperature often hovers around 32 degrees, so you don't know if it's going to be rain or snow or ice or sleet. And I take that as a metaphor. He used to go out in front of the studio at Channel 8 before his broadcast, and he had the advantage of having all the Doppler radar and all the scientific stuff, but he wouldn't go on camera until he went outside on the sidewalk, put his finger in the air, looked up at the sky, because he knew there was something that science couldn't tell him. I hate to say that to a scientist like you, Steve, but there is that.
Yeah, but as you mentioned, the 32-degree essay has to do with a fall, the kind of fall that one does on the ice. And at our age, that can be a bad thing. So, and in fact, one of the things I was going to ask you about was what a friend of mine calls the organ recital that
Right.
old folks have when they get together for the first time. There are aches and pains in the book. There are injuries. There is a scary heart event.
The heart surgery, yeah.
Yes. So, but this is not like, it's hard to explain this to people who may be younger than us, if it's possible, that these are not your old uncle telling these stories, although your old uncle may tell them very well. But there's something about a Lary Bloom essay that takes you by surprise. It can start out humorously, it can break into deeply serious stuff, and then back again. I do remember
the heart essay in particular. I gotta have heart. It's called.
Yes.
Because I learned from my doctor that the heart is a reasonably important organ. It's something that it's not optional. One must have one, and it must work. And when the valves become somehow not as effective as they once were, you have to do something about it. So of course I had a drive-by heart surgery, which they can do nowadays by going up through your groin. And so that's, I think what Steve's referring to is the part of the essay in which many after the surgery, how many people in New Haven, in Hartford, New York City, and apparently Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City, or wanted to see how my groin was doing, including the Hartford Symphony Orchestra came by to check my groin. Everybody came by to check my groin. And when that happened, I began to, strange things occurred to me, such as the nurse in the hallway, my nurse who was taking care of me all night. She was talking to the woman who was cleaning up, and she said, she wasn't talking about me, she was talking about her 2-year-old at home, and how when she gets home in the morning, her 2-year-old says, "Hello, how is your work? Good morning to you." And the person cleaning up said, "That's amazing for a 2-year-old." And so when she came in to see me and check my groin, they always ask me, could I check your groin? Could I check it? And I said, "Could I ask you something? That's an amazing 2-year-old you have. She must be quite a good girl, smart girl." "Oh, no, she's not a girl. She's my dog." Well, this is what happens in the middle of a difficult, serious episode in life. It's the mixture of absurdity and worry and seriousness. I mean, this is the way it is. And that's why some of the things I like best in the arts are things that have that juxtaposition. The idea of having, or what they call nowadays, what do they call it? Dramedy. Dramedy, which is, life as it really occurs, as opposed to trying to build sympathy or trying to say, "Oh, poor me," because in the end, it's all there's a lot of poor me. We got to make a human comedy out of it, I think, and that's what I try to do in the book too. Not jokes, but trying to figure out a way to present material through a lens that when you think about it afterwards, you can see in a different way than that it was in the moment. It's a difficult, and Steve and I, as editors at the current at Northeast Magazine, we try to impart that idea to writers. The idea that if you're writing about illness, you're not really writing about an illness, you're writing about obstacle in the midst of life. So what is the other part of life that this illness affects in some way? I think because we all face that. And I think that one of the things that that writers can do is bring people into their world to show that they're not alone. That if they find absurdity in serious moments, that's only natural. And I think it's, and if we can somehow reflect that in our work, visual artists we're way ahead of writers in doing that. A lot of people that juxtaposition. Now, Twain, of course, was a master at that. When Huck Finn says, "I was powerful lazy," those two words had never been put together before. Powerful lazy, that is, to me, the reflection of the complexity of life, and that's what we're trying to do. And I hope I did that in this book. It's a small book. It's only 128 pages. And I want to also give credit to Rennie McQuilkin, who runs Antrim House, which is a publishing house in Simsbury, and he is a great champion of Connecticut writers and a co-founder of the Sunken Garden and the first artistic director of the Sunken Garden Poetry Festival. So I want to make sure I give a shout out to Rennie. Anyway, your next question, comment, insult. any one of those are okay.
You know what, you had suggested we invite the audience in, so I'm going to ask Omar, who is in the background here, whether any questions have shown up yet.
I've asked a couple of times and we haven't received any questions yet.
Well,
So
go
yeah.
to it.
Yeah, I'm looking at the chat box here, and I think yeah, we don't even have the same old hands, right? So we're open to that. Anybody who wants.
We're open to that. One thing that runs through your essays in various different ways is is music. Music is, as I recall, when we worked together, was a huge part of your life. Everything from your own piano playing, which does figure in this, and then the music you encounter on the street when you're out there with your co-author, and in other places in Stanley Crouch.
Stanley Crouch, right, and Duke Ellington. Yeah, it gives me a chance to comment. Stanley Crouch had a lecture. Oh, yeah, the lecture that cost me this whole day of entertainment. That cost me not even a thin dime. This essay talks about one of the first weeks we lived here. I got on the Yale shuttle, which is free. I went to this lecture that was free at Yale. And after the lecture, there was a lunch that was provided that was free. And I got back on the shuttle that came home, and what a wonderful opportunity that was. And quite an introduction to the city and what it offers. Duke Ellington, yeah. And so listening to his lecture about one song, Come Sunday, written by Ellington and Billy Strayhorn, that seemed to me was a metaphor. And it allowed me to go back into my introduction to Duke Ellington when I was a college student and he came to play in concert. And I remember him sitting at the piano wearing this gorgeous suit. And I remember his fingers slapping at the keys. And I thought, this is the most beautiful moment I have ever seen. And I've been trying to find that suit ever since. So I could wear it, and maybe I could play the piano the way he does. Of course, when he played Take the A Train, in his way, and I play it more like Take the C+ Train. But he's the idea of having that kind of a moment when we're sitting there, 60 of us in this room, and Stanley Crouch is playing the recording of Mahalia Jackson singing Come Sunday, a deeply spiritual song. And we're all sitting there with our eyes closed and, kind of tears dripping down. And, or my late friend Leonora Hayes used to say, there wasn't a dry seat in the house. And to be a part of that and to take that in is inspirational. And that's, I think our suburbs, our city, our exurbs and so forth all offer that. The thing that the city offers is all of it condensed in a way that every night there's something, every day there's something, and you kick yourself because you didn't see the calendar and you missed it. The other night, George Coleman playing at the Morse Recital Hall, the jazz saxophonist with his group, and he's 87 and he still plays fabulous, just in aggressively and innovatively, just as he did when he was in his 30s. You know, that is for us, you know, those of us who complain about our aches and pains, you know, it gives us a reminder that, you know, as long as we're breathing, we can still do something, you know. So anyway, Steve, so did we have,
Well, but music, the anecdote, there's a seasonal anecdote about music that I recall, which is your mother's comment when you were playing Christmas carols in your Jewish household.
oh, I always love the Christmas season because, yes, because we put aside the Mozart and the Beethoven and the Chopin, all these things that were really hard to play. And my teacher would drive in her green Studebaker, which I think was the official car of, you know, I don't know if anybody ever remembers the Studebaker. She would go and show up on Tuesday afternoons, and she would bring in December Christmas carols. And I loved playing them. And I tried to explain to my mother that, you know, when she complained because, you know, we had a Hanukkah household, and I said, you know, so many of the great Christmas carols are written by Jews. And she said, oh, she couldn't see that as any kind of a reason to play Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, which I loved to play. And I loved to play Silent Night, and I loved to play all of those great songs, you know. And you know, it was a little bit of a rebellion. And I have now, you know, in
What did your mother say when you told her about the great Jewish authors, composers?
Well, she had non sequiturs, you know. She would say things like, well, if just because somebody jumps in the lake, you're going to jump in the lake too. That had nothing to do with 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 I think she was fearful all her life that I was going to write a Christmas carol. I succeeded in not writing one, but I'm still thinking of Steve Metcalf and I, you know, also a friend of the Twain House and a wonderful composer, have thought about writing a Christmas carol, but over the last 30 years, we've thought about it. We have failed to do it. It seems to me like the world doesn't need another one, right? I mean, if you have, I saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus, you don't need another. I mean, a classic like that. We have a couple of questions in the chat box.
Yeah, one from John Moran, our former Hartford Current colleague.
Oh, right.
Who is actually also involved with the Mark Twain House these days. Wonderful. But Omar, did you, shall I look at the chat? I'm not sure.
We can look at the chat box.
Here it is. How did the pandemic affect your relocation from Chester to New Haven?
Well, you know, we had come before the pandemic, and you know, there was a lot, of course, tragedy during the worst of the pandemic, and one of the things that, you know, part of the collateral damage of the pandemic was, for the first time, in terms of deprivation, if you think about World War II, where people sacrificed a lot, we lost a lot of people. At least they could get out of their houses, you know. At least they could go to some art museum. They could do something to restore their souls. One of the issues that we faced, and we saw it more clearly here in New Haven than if we had stayed in Chester, is that when we needed art the most, we lost it, because everyone's spirit during the worst of the pandemic was so affected in a negative way, and we had to remind ourselves that when we go to a museum, when we go to the theater, when we go to when we took that for granted. We go to concerts. We are renewed. It's not just that we enjoy ourselves. We walk out of the theater inspired, foolishly thinking, I could do that, and there's a lift to our step. And there was no lift to anybody's step when you couldn't go outside, when you couldn't go to a restaurant, when you couldn't go to a performance. So I think we saw the pandemic in a slightly different way than had we stayed in Chester. And I just wrote a piece that I haven't submitted yet to the Independent. I want to also give a shout out, as you did, to Paul Bass at the New Haven Independent. It's something we should look at as a modern response to the decline of traditional journalism. Paul Bass has created this miracle of a website. So it's really important to check the calendar and to get out and do stuff, because it's really good for the soul. Yeah, thanks, John, for that question.
And it looks like, again, this is not in the Q&A, but maybe Omar could help us with this. Kim Virginia asks, there's, well, she wants to hear more about Lucca's contribution to your urban experience. I think that's a good one. There's a happy hour at the dog park is one.
Happy hour at the dog park. Well, I think, yeah, the point, that essay, first of all, the idea of having a dog, and an active dog. This is a working dog. These Italian water dogs are bred to find truffles. So far, Lucca has not found a truffle in New Haven, but he did dig up 3 cooked sweet potatoes in the backyard. How they got, I don't know. It was quite a hero for that. But I explained to him that the market for sweet potatoes is not quite up to the market for truffles. And one of the things about having a dog, and the reason why I say the dog contributed so heavily to this book and why he's the co-author, is because I must take him out three times a day, sometimes at the park, sometimes around the block, sometimes. And it's during these walks that we find our discoveries, that we find things that we didn't find before, that we learn things. And the dog park essay is that getting to the dog park on this day, because I was coming from the shoreline. I was driving from the shoreline, and we saw people driving crazy, an accident in front of us on the way to the dog park. We get to the dog park, where we go every day, and the dogs are not bothered at all by the news of the day, by political scandals, by statistics, by all the darkness that appears on the newspapers that still exist. They don't read the front page of the New York Times, the world going to hell, and so forth. They see in the moment, period. And I joked before when I was talking to Steve about the idea that the dog does not like to use in his stories the past tense. He only uses the present tense. That's exactly what happens. These dogs are out there in the moment, period. And they are just having a blast with each other. And there's something we can learn from that. And I'm fairly naive, of course, because I only get a dog apparently once every 78 years. So I'm very inexperienced with this. But these are kind of illuminations that arrived when Lucca arrived. That's why he's the co-author, because there would be no book without it.
Aaron Good asks, he says that Larry's book was released at the same time as another superb and incisive book about New Haven, The Other Side of Prospect by Nicholas Davidoff, which explores a very different side of the city. Is it fair to say there are two very different New Havens divided by race and class, or is that the wrong way to look at it?
No, that's a great question, and I think I'm going to try to be successful in answering it. It's a really good book. Tremendous amount of research. He knows New Haven very well. This is The Other Side of Prospect, which is a book that's getting a lot of attention around the country, and of course, it is reaffirming the kind of bad press that New Haven has gotten over the years. William Finnegan's book on Connecticut schools many years ago did that, but my book is, sometimes a couple of wags have considered it to be not really a New Haven book, but an East Rock book. East Rock is a neighborhood in New Haven, which is sometimes called the Yale Ghetto, because so many graduate students live here, or professors live here, and it's another world away from the Ville, from Newhallville, which is what Davidoff writes about. But he points out in his book this division in New Haven, and and that's an important thing, because he knows it well. He knows when New Haven was a great manufacturing city, the people in that part of town were making a good living. Then the manufacturing jobs left, a lot of them, most of them, replaced by other things, and so this neighborhood that is not far from Yale has suffered a great deal. On the other hand, and what I hope my book does is to build on that idea of one New Haven as opposed to two New Havens, in the sense that it celebrates the diversity of the city. In Halloween, busloads of kids arrive at our doorstep, and it is the most diverse collection of people I have ever seen. And I think it's part of what makes this city thrive. Not ignoring the difficulties, and a lot of them economic, and some of them some of the things that turn up in the poorer parts of the city. This is something that we as citizens have to address, and because it's part of a national problem, it's part of a world problem. And one of the key parts of the book, for me anyway, and I don't think I'd have a book without it, is the idea of a citizen of a city taking responsibility for doing something to improve the quality of life for someone. And that is sort of the backdrop, or that is really the idea of the effort that Sue and I had to save a family that had been torn apart by the Trump's Muslim ban, and a really, really heartbreaking story that we got involved with. And for 4 years, we tried very hard to reunite this family. And it seemed during that time they would never see each other again. Part of the family stuck in as refugees in Lebanon, and the older part of the family, the two grandparents here, heartbroken. And so we felt that it's not enough to take the joys of the city. It's important to try to make something better. You know, as the old, I forget, Steve, you would know this. What's the expression? You say you're not required to finish the job, but you are required to try to, to try to contribute something positive. And I think that in the city, you see that. Whereas in Chester, as lovely as it was, it wasn't in our faces. So I think it's really interesting that Nick has this book out at this point. And I have this other book, but they do cross. They do cross. And I recommend his book highly because he is fair. He is fair in the book, and he portrays the city problems in very powerful terms. But thanks for that question. It's a great one.
Like we're nearing the end of our hour, but I did have a question which was rather large and maybe too large. I mean,
Yeah.
Vietnam was a huge part of your life, and that is the stepping off point for several essays or references appear. And my curiosity is, you do mention at one point that you have not, despite what you've written about Vietnam and your experiences there, you've never turned it into the book that I think I heard about, 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
Oh, my Vietnam book?
Yeah. And,
Well,
and you sort of, you treat that very issue. Anyway, I'll let you go on.
Well, I have a couple of essays about, one of the things that, the first thing I ever wrote for Paul was called My Talking Hat, which is in the book. And one of the things that drew me to New Haven, the idea of, people responding to the hat. It says a Vietnam veteran on it 4 times, in front, on the side, on the in the back, and the things people said when they saw the hat, which is very different from what they said when we came back from that war. People on the street just offering their thoughts or thank yous or whatever. But more than that, the fact that people opened up, veterans of the Iraq War, veterans of Afghanistan, anybody who had been in the military would then spill out their stories. And I think I got the impression from many of them that they weren't familiar with the idea of telling their stories. They had kept their stories to themselves because they couldn't explain them to even their families. But when they saw the hat, they somehow felt that it was safe because they could explain it. And there was a kind of warmth to it all. And so my commentary on the Vietnam War, which is, almost a necessity for a writer, came in a variety of ways, mostly in essays. I wrote one for the Harper Current on the 25th anniversary of the end of the war that they ran on page 1. And then I wrote a play that was at the Katharine Hepburn Cultural Center. It was the first play they ever had there, called Wild Black Yonder, which is set in the present, but goes back to a lost pilot, a lost co-pilot in the war who was my friend. And that play was based on that idea, the idea of what we didn't understand about that war. I haven't really written about the return to Vietnam that Sue and I had, and that will show up in, I hope, at some point. 40 years, 50 years after I was there, to see what happened to that country. And we often say it was probably the best trip we ever took. The idea of, and the way people responded to us. I was kind of worried about it because I thought, well, I was on a certain side in the war, and but people were so kind to us and so nice to us. What a beautiful country that is, and what a tragedy it all was. So I don't think I answered your question. I don't even remember your question. But,
That's all right.
but in a way, when you have, let's say people go through, a period when they were foster children, or they have some kind of abuse in their life, or they have something like that, it's never over. It's something that you live with, and you try. It's kind of our job to try to address it. So I try to address it in two ways. One of the essays is called "How to Sell a Used Subaru," and that's really a piece about the Vietnam War, and how to sell a used Subaru. So I think one of the things that where writers fail is they think the subject is war, but it's never really war. It's never really illness. It's never really any of that. It's what do we take away from it? Anyway, there you go. I think we're about out of time, right?
Yeah, we must be almost out of time. Thank you so much. Again, this is the book. And Omar, I'm not sure. Are there any other questions that people have?
We have one really quick one here from Marion.
Yes.
Yeah, and she says, living near the park, without mentioning at the time that you were living in East Rock neighborhood, which would specify what park you're talking about, when there's another huge, excellent park on the West Rock side of town. Yes, Edgewood Park. Yeah, right. So there are many more than even two New Haven experiences. Westville and that area, and Worcester Square. There are great neighborhoods in New Haven. I'm just so familiar with where I live, and I try to write about all of them, but I fail. But that's a good point, Marion. Thank you.
All right. Anything more?
No, I think Omar will. I think you're muted, Omar.
I think that's it. Looks like we got all the questions. That's excellent. Yeah, thank you so much for this great conversation, Larry and Steve. And thank you to all of you for joining us. Just a reminder that our museum will continue to be open 7 days a week this holiday season, except for Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and New Year's Day. So please come and see the house in all its holiday glory. And shop at our store for your loved ones.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and you can buy Larry's book there.
Yeah, and if you're not, as Twain would say, powerful, lazy, you can actually show up at the house. It's always a great experience. Right?
It sure is. Thank you so much for joining us, and please join us again. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Omar.
Thank you.